So my talk's going to be it's kind of thin on philosophical meat, but like it's more propaganda. So it's called Epistemically, Self-Ablaze, Neuroscience, AI, and the Synthetic Image of Post-Capitalist Subjectivity. So we start with Seller's distinction between manifest and scientific image. Okay, we've already heard a bit about it, but quickly, it's a conceptual framework that allows for the deliberate coordination of perception, conception, and action, and the treatment of other people in terms of behavior that can be explained by reasons, right? So then this is opposed to the scientific image, which is a materialistic explanation of the world in the causal naturalistic terms of science. So there's a gulf between the intentional order of the manifest image and the causal order of the scientific image, according to Sellers. So this, so his statement of this basically involves a rejection of ruthless reductionism, so which he thinks is a kind of a naturalization that fails to account for intentionality and normativity of perception and cognition. But also a rejection of the dualistic divide between mind and matter, or those different orders, right? The causal, naturalistic, and normative linguistic. So he's arguing for a stereoscopic synthesis of the two images. He was talking at this time when science was at this stage, and I think now there's very compelling accounts of both within the scientific image of intentionality and normativity of perception and cognition. So we fast forward to today, predictive process. So we have a new scientific image of thought, I think, which is comes in the last kind of 10, 15 years, predictive processing, which follows from developments in neuroscience and AI, particularly the massive success of deep neural nets. Central claim is that all perception, cognition, and action are predictive processes directed towards the long-term average reduction of uncertainty. And uncertainty or surprisal is the quantifiable difference between predicted sensory input and actual sensory input. So the idea is that there's no kind of problem of adequacy, with regard to the world. It's just there's only a comparison between input and expected input, right? So it's all internal to the system. No. But okay, the dominant approach to this theory, whether implicitly or explicitly, invokes the modern liberal Kantian subject and frames thought in strongly individualistic and survivalistic terms, so that cognitive theories of surprisal-minimizing seamlessly fit with econometric theories of utility maximizing. I'll skip this. I've decided to go via compression through memes, so this is part of the argument. Maybe can just, it's got something missing. So predictive processing loses sight of post-Kantian critical theory. And here's another one. I'm not going to explain it, but this is just, okay, so basically I'm saying, if we look at Sellers preserves certain core aspects of Kantian philosophy, but he's in a substantial agreement with those critiques of transcendental idealism that emphasize historical forms of subjectivization involving constitutive forms of ignorance in the opposing interests of an antagonism, most explicitly Hegel and Marx. So Sellersian philosophy is therefore also amenable both to the inclusion of other post-Kantian critiques, pick your choice, and to the critical repudiation of the current scientific image in terms of the forms of domination and oppression and of ignorance that it maintains or propagates. So back to predictive processing, there's a kind of idea of generalized model performativity, so like a self-fulfilling prophecy, kind of. It's already implicit in predictive processing, and particularly with Howey's concept of self-evidencing. But let's just say it in the most basic terms. Like Andy Clark gives this example. If you kind of if you think that your friend is angry with you, and then you see them looking down like this gives you further evidence that they're angry with you, and then you'll act as if they're angry with you, and this goes into a feedback loop, and they really are angry with you. So, okay, but this kind of generalizes it a bit more. So Howey's proposal is the brain is constantly producing evidence for its own existence by predicting future states in which it still exists. So together with Friston's free energy principle, which is, I could explain the details later if you're interested, the theory of self-evidencing suggests that living predictive systems treat their own future existence as a hypothesis and continuously try to find proof or new evidence for the truth of this hypothesis. So here's two quotes from Howey's paper on here. So he says, perceptual inference makes the hypothesis fit the input. Active inference makes the sensory input fit the hypothesis. So these are the two ways of reducing uncertainty in predictive processing. And then here again, active inference is the process of actively sampling the world for evidence that would support one's hypothesis. Okay, so you can see this kind of performativity going on here, right? And it can easily be seen, I think, how the notion of self-evidencing is far from neutral when extended into the analysis of concrete social situations where there are dynamics of power and privilege. So I'm currently writing a paper with two friends, Jimena Clavel and Sonia de Heiger, and we're proposing a third way that a system can reduce uncertainty besides perceptual inference and active inference. We call that active ignorance. This is the way in which a cognitive agent, especially when in a position of power or privilege, can ignore, actively repress, or destroy any evidence that goes against the truth of their hypothesis. So the concept of active ignorance just makes this model performativity an explicit object of study within the PP framework, and by extension, various pervasive aspects of social conditions such as repression, oppression, domination, ideology, and alienation. So again, we're going to explain by memes. This is from The Wire, Duke the Stats. Your priors come out clean. Well, unfortunately, though, active ignorance is a pervasive global social phenomenon, and the crises are becoming harder to disacknowledge. And one of those is the AI crisis, or the crisis of intelligence. So AI is accelerating the contradictions both of capitalism and of the liberal notion of freedom. I think it represents a new form of primitive accumulation based on the expropriation or colonization of cognitive perceptual functions. So, again, this is clearly kind of on the AI threatens jobs, so many jobs are effectively now are employed in the obsolescence of their own jobs, but also teaching AI how to do any kind of perceptual cognitive function, any kind of uncategorizable affective intensity, and any kind of normative linguistic social interaction. So I think this leads in some ways to a kind of generalized collapse of the manifest image. So the manifest image depends on or presupposes a kind of homunculus-like attribution of inner agency. acting according to reasons, which Sellers explains through the myth of Jones as the interiorization and individualization of a social interactive function. So when most aspects of manifest experience are generatively reproducible and statistically predictable, the phantom self is the basis of the manifest image, is evacuated of its spontaneity, uniqueness, and felt truth. So I think the manifest image rests on, one, the treatment of cognitive agents as invisible centers of control that direct behavior according to reasons that can in principle be articulated in Gaga, and two, the transparency of subpersonal neurological processes and suprapersonal socio-linguistic processes to personal experience and its articulation in Gaga. So what I mean by this is, for example, our thoughts are neuronal activation patterns to which we have no access to or voluntary control of on the level of their neuronalness. And we can think in language, or we think in language, but we have very little capacity to think about the way our thoughts are structured by it, or to structure it itself, right? So current progress in neuroscience and AI threaten to collapse the foundations of this, of the manifest image, firstly because AI enters into Gaga, although albeit not very well at the moment, and secondly because neuroscience reveals the subpersonal neurological processes and AI predictively models the superpersonal socio-linguistic processes that are transparent to manifest awareness. So, I mean, I'm not saying this is happening now, it's just like over a long duration, and I think in the context of late capitalism, this will be a death by 1,000 paperless cuts. But what does the scientific image reveal? Okay, I mean, this is a particular take on it, but Thomas Metzinger's put out a recent book that gives a thorough empirical analysis of states of mind induced by meditation practice, because it considers such states of minimal phenomenal experience to reveal the necessary rather than contingent form of consciousness. So Metzinger says here, the simplest form of conscious experience lacks time representation, self-location in a spatial frame of reference, the experience of ownership, agency, and autobiographical self-awareness, and a phenomenally experienced first-person perspective. So, firstly, this enables Metzinger to pose a strong rejection to philosophical arguments that consciousness is irreducibly subjective. So he calls these anti-naturalist arguments from subjectivity, and he says they're fundamentally mistaken because minimal phenomenal experience is not a subjective phenomenon at all. I mean, in order to kind of situate this a bit, we need to go kind of back to so Metzinger's done a lot of work on consciousness, and he's kind of coming from Barr's, initially from Barr's global workspace theory, which says that conscious information resides in global working memory, and that consciousness is simply the global availability of that information. Now, Metzinger's earlier work had developed this claim by further specifying that consciousness only arises when a model of this working memory has appeared in global working memory itself. And in his more recent work, he's been developing the notion that experience of mental agency, which accompanies shifts in attention or logical inferences, making an argument in your head. This also depends on the representation of that agency in what he calls an epistemic agent model. So his claim is that Western subjectivity in philosophy is based on the spontaneous mistaken identification of itself with the epistemic agent model. And it's the idea is that when you're attending, when you, in order to kind of deliberately think, you need to first of all get your epistemic agent model running, and that's the way you're deliberately thinking from, and that it's that which has been mistaken for thought when that's only a sub aspect of thought, right? A module that's running within a much wider system, let's say. So there's an interesting relation to Steller's attack on the myth of the given in his argument, because it concerns the relation between non-conceptual knowledge and conceptually structured intentional acts. So Metzinger considers meditative practice to enable, in the terms of predictive processing, a suspension of the priors and hyperpriors that structure perception. Okay, so on the predictive processing model, the idea is that the brain is a hierarchically nested set of Bayesian processing, predictive processing. So it's all about the calculating likelihoods based on priors. So you've got priors, and then stacked right at the at the basis of all of a number of priors are the most abstract priors, which are the hyperpriors. So, for example, egoic reference, subject-object duality. These are the kind of hyperpriors that Metzinger thinks kind of are able to be suspended in meditative practice, and that's also similar to the explanations of psychedelic states in the work of Friston. So he argues that properly attending to the phenomenology of such states of pure awareness leads to a new definition of consciousness. So consciousness is a continuing, ongoing process of non-conceptually knowing the organism's current state of epistemic openness, of expecting new knowledge without yet having it. Okay, so you've got to remember here that, there's, going back to global workspace, it's this non-conceptual knowing has to do with the global availability of information in working memory. So then the following is that pure consciousness is knowing only this epistemic openness itself. Okay, so here we get to suchness as the epistemically self-ablaze perceptual object. So there's a long tradition of debate in Buddhist philosophy concerning the relation between suchness and emptiness, or tathata and sunyata. So Lao Tzu describes the Tao as tsujan, which means self-so, and refers to the quality of self-disclosure and self-manifestation revealed by meditative practice. It literally translates as self-ablaze. So Metzinger relates suchness to emptiness via the concept of epistemic openness. Perceptual content is epistemically open if it has no essence, no intrinsic and predetermined meaning, no label, and no obvious canonical interpretation. It is available, but as something that can be seen from an infinite number of perspectives. And I mean, incidentally, he's relating this to self-evidencing. So for Metzinger, every perceptual object is a self-evidencing system. Effectively, it's a hypothesis that's trying to find evidence for itself. But it's also every perceptual object is like infinitely open in this way. It's just that we generally close them down or restrict them in forms of intentional acts. So so then he goes on, so suchness then becomes the emptiness of appearances in the more precise sense of their being epistemically open. And so when awareness is both epistemically open and reflexive, the perceptual object is epistemically self-ablaze. And Metzinger asks, what would be like for the whole self to be self-ablaze? I would go further and say, what about the whole of social, society? What if we could set that afire? So seeing suchness upends the constant process of meaning-making, and the emptiness of appearances is their utter meaninglessness. Liberated from meaning, they are self-ablaze, shining in their own inner light, epistemically open. Thought is on fire because it has opened itself up to a larger possibility space. Okay, so I mean, I'm kind of summing up here polemically cognition. I mean, we could say neuroscience discloses the falseness of the manifest image in at least in its modern Western liberal capitalist form. Cognition is only contingently structured by egoic self-awareness. It shows that thought is more fundamentally impersonal, improprietary, and radically epistemically open. Though cognition or intelligence is intrinsically collective or communist in this very loose sense, what we're witnessing now with the ascent of AI is a massive project of expropriating that commons in the service of private interests. So I'm turning back to AI now. Okay, where's the revolutionary subject though? I mean, Jensen Huang, NVIDIA CEO, tells us that this is the next industrial revolution, AI. But where it's workers, well, I mean, everyone knows, I guess, it's a very small workforce, but AI depends on the free labor of its user base, whose statistical data are being interactively modeled. So the proletariat class with the revolutionary subjects of the first industrial revolution, then are the post-digital, post-AI alienated users of the STRAC, the revolutionary subjects of the second. It doesn't really fill the revolutionary heart with hope. But let's, anyway, have a speculative fiction. Well, first of all, let's say this. Okay, there's been plenty of speculation about future AI doom scenarios, and I think it's true that those cover up and detract from the problems of actually existing AI developments. But that doesn't mean that those future doom speculations are incorrect. If AI development continues to be led by state security motives and profit-seeking motives, it will surely lead to disaster in various ways. In my opinion, the only solution is communist AI, or more technically, publicly owned, globally available, explainable artificial intelligence. So the call for communist AI, paraphrasing Marx, is not a state of affairs to be established. It's the real movement which abolishes the present state of things. The conditions of this movement result from the premises now in existence. This may seem a far-fetched possibility given the state of the world, but perhaps a social revolution could be bolstered out of the post-industrial wasteland, one which not only demands that AI be in the hands of the people, but that uses the tools of neuroscience and AI to expand and transform the possibility space for perception, cognition, and action. An AI-driven acid communism directed towards the immolation of the capitalist subject and dedicated to setting thought itself alight. Then I end with two more. That one and that. And yeah, that's the end.
I think my question is just going to be really easy in a way, because it's just like retreatment, I guess, of what you've already said. But I just wanted to give you a chance to say something a bit more in a way about this description. So what I find really interesting is how the way science, let's say neuroscience and Metzinger, is narrating or providing us with a description of the possibility to, let's say, produce a rupture between the construction of the subject in capitalism via the kind of standard the self-construction of the subject in science, right? Which, as we know, they both become kind of collapsed in bourgeois kind of subjectivity, if you like this idea of self-conception as an illusion. So I guess we fully understanding like how they're imbricated or even collapsed to try and tear them apart by means of science, right? So the scientific narrative is enabling us to do that through the means of, let's say, meditation in this instance. What I am interested in is like how that's configured in your thinking in terms of like the predictive processing model, because you could say, or we could all say, I'm going to go and meditate now, right? So that has a predictive processing element in the sense that there are expectations that are imagined already prior to doing the meditation. And then, of course, there's the afterlife of the post-meditation moment, which is well, where PP comes back in again. So you've got this kind of description of a process that, again, could be explained through certain scientific processes. But I guess that process in itself needs also to be extracted from the processes of capitalist principles as well, in terms of like certain forms of subjective idealism, for example, right? So what I'm saying is like there's a double negation that's required, I think. The number one is that, yes, maybe some consciousness can confront the impossibility of the subject in itself, right? But in order to prevent the production of the same norms being reconstituted after this experience, right, we need a kind of negation of the very process in itself. I don't know if that makes sense, but there's like a double negation, I think, that's required, not just a negation in terms of one instance, but in terms of the whole condition of the system. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, what I'm not saying, I don't want to like sound like a Silicon Valley enthusiast saying, oh yeah, yoga and mushrooms and
no, I get that.
And iPads, right? No, it's like the point, I mean, and of course, like, so we can meditate, but then like afterwards you've got to act in the world, right? So right, okay. So yes, and I can see why this. So certainly, I mean, but the idea is, I mean, I guess like the point of bringing up this was one to talk about the more fundamental aspect of consciousness, but then also I think and Metzinger describes it as this. He says meditation is effectively just a kind of neurofeedback mechanism that we've just happened to housed on our biological system, right? But then there's more kind of technical ways in which we could have neurofeedback or control of neural states, right, and modulation of them. And yeah, I think if there's a well, at the moment there's the direction is. The direction of this development are to do with authoritarian control and exploitation, but they could be directed towards social emancipation and like expanding ideas. That's more or less. But yeah, that's got to be something like it's got to be a process that it's not given.
I don't want to ask you to say anything more, but just to be really clear, it's just that division between the necessity of the illusion of a self model and the annihilation of the illusion of the self model in capitalism. And I mean, it's basically that as a double condition that I'm seeing both in not only in Metzinger but your predictive processing, and it's like that's why I'm saying double negation, because it's like both need to be subject to critique, not just one. So just to try and be clear about that, right? Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much for that talk. There's a lot of different things that I'm sort of thinking about, but that not most of it is not very concrete. But I've worked on predictive processing for a while, so I don't know. Maybe if this idea is also somewhere written down, then maybe I'll look at that different time. One very minor comment that I do think is always important to note when people kind of ask that question of where are the workers with artificial intelligence. Because on one hand, there's of course this user-produced data that fuels the system. But I think it's very important to remember that there is still a lot of manual labor going into these systems in terms of making sure they are safe. Because of course the internet is absolutely filled with the most horrific things that humanity has ever produced. And most companies don't want their AIs to put those things into their AI creations. And so usually what it is entire armies of labor in the third world. Specifically for OpenAI, ChatGPT that was in Kenya, and for certain systems in Amazon there was 1,000 people in India. are used to label things from the internet to try and make sure that the systems are kept safe. So those people spend day in, day out looking at the most horrific things on the internet and make sure that it is labeled unsafe so that the AI system doesn't use that in its reproductions. And so in that sense, AI isn't as much of a strong break as it is with the regular ways of doing things where our labor is outsourced to the third world for, in this case, less than $2 an hour. So I did think it was just an important minor comment for us to keep in mind with this.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. But you know, if in comparison to the first industrial revolution, the labor is still like way less. You know, so it's if you're looking for like where's the revolution going to come from? It can't be from the workers alone, right? I think. Yeah.
Okay. I'll get Philip's question and then Curtis. Yeah, thanks for passing me the mic, but I don't know, do we have time for Anil's question? Because I think my question is a compound of Amanda's and Anil's.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. But I'm not going to be as eloquent as Amanda or Anil. No. When you mentioned, just one small question. Metzinger's term for egoic
self-awareness.
Egoic self-awareness. Okay, thank you. When you mentioned publicly owned, globally available, explainable AI as communist AI, I thought, okay, but that's what I think of what the form of the human should be.
Mm-hmm.
But so, forgetting that I'm talking about the form of the human and only about communist AI, wouldn't this still requires an egoic self-awareness in the sense that, at least in Anil's constructive intuitionistic terms, where you need to start having time and some stuff to positively constrain stuff, at least a little bit more than self-ablazeness, I think, in order to make stuff explainable.
Yeah, I don't know that you necessarily need egoic self-awareness to make things explainable. You can explain things from the process point of view. So I don't think that's necessary, no. And I'm not saying I'm not trying to argue that egoic self-awareness is the problem necessarily, or that that we need to get rid of it completely or so. It's just a matter of kind of that there's a certain historical form of self-identification of the subject, right, of subjectivization that I think can be transformed via kind of the scientific image, basically, and the new technologies.
Thank you. Yeah. Kurt is next.
I'm not sure I have much to add. I kind of echo Philippe's and Amanda's thoughts here to some degree. But I guess my question is more clarificatory in terms of Metzinger's model. So in terms of this minimal phenomenal consciousness that you get from meditative experience, and probably there's other ways, of course, you mentioned psychedelics and stuff. Because the model that they're working out from is a model of, I mean, I don't know the details, but it seems to be some sort of, feedback control model of agency in which the predictive processing stands as a means for parsing information, as you said, that will sort of ensure the future existence of the system itself. I'm just curious, how they explain in operational terms how the minimal phenomenal consciousness is possible in the sense that you said it's, again, I don't remember the exact technical terms you use, but in terms of the global workspace, it's about this availability of information, but without anything that's sort of constraining it in a sense, if I could put it that way. So I guess in what I'm saying in a sense is it's kind of like a ground zero where the distinction between information and noise sort of disappears because there's nothing that would ensure your ability to discern one thing from another in a sense, right? So is it like a kind of ground state? Is it like I'm thinking about it, just to maybe go back to some of Anil's or the question that we had earlier, is it kind of like, and like if this global workspace is like a topos or something, is it like the initial object or a terminal object or something? I'm trying to think about how it's obviously factually, empirically possible for us to have this experience, but I'm just curious what functional role it plays in the model of agency that it's coming out of, or that Metzinger's sort of couching it in.
Well, in Metzinger's count, so you've got, firstly you've got the phenomenal self-model, right? So you don't have phenomenal experience without a model of your phenomenal awareness, right? And then also within that, you've got a model of epistemic or mental agency, and the phenomenology of mental events, according to him, is like, well, you've got this kind of running epistemic agent model, which is where you're saying, for example, I think I am, I think therefore I am. But then you've got also, as soon as you're not doing any kind of directed kind of thought, immediately what happens is that you relapse to the default mode network. So kind of seemingly random kind of thoughts start popping up in kind of fragments that are half kind of aware of, and so on. And so, and actually, well, he says that actually kind of you're running your epistemic agent model for about kind of 20 to 30% of your life. So, because you're sleeping, you're not running it. As you're getting older, it's getting less able, right? So most of the time, you're not, so this identification by philosophers of like, I think, this is a spurious one, effectively, when you look at actual what thinking is, or what the experience of thought is. I forget if I didn't answer something there.
I think that gets at it.
Yeah.
Something about this randomness. You want to reply?
Oh, about the signal and noise. Yeah, I think with this idea of like the pure awareness of an object. The idea is that the subject-object distinction collapses, and so but then I don't think you necessarily then lose all kinds of. I mean, you surely would still have a distinction between kind of form and a form and background or something like that. I don't think it's necessarily going to collapse all of that into a kind of formlessness. Otherwise, So and this is like, so Metzinger talks about that. It's like, one way of easily characterizing kind of pure awareness would be like it's contentless, but actually, if there is a content, but it's just like very minimal. Is his argument.
Yeah, then there's a couple of questions by Anil. We would ask you to choose one, perhaps. I'm not sure how.
Yeah, so
For perceptual contents to have no essence in your discussion of meditation seems to violate Seller's account of perception. I assume you don't think these accounts can be reconciled. And the other one, you can choose. How do you think AI relates to the notion of general intellect in Marx? Does his harnessing of the general intellect gives us an entry point towards an account beyond that of a mere exploitation of worker cognition?
Okay, well, can I deal with the first one quickly? It's,
the first one was Sellers and meditation.
Essence. I'm not sure exactly about this, the details of this. So I'm not sure why it would violate Seller's account of perception. I'm assuming because you think that it would be that would go against the idea of picturing, which is somehow kind of isomorphically tracking the essence. Is that the idea? I'm not sure. Can we speak to Anil?
Yeah, Anil, if you want to. Yeah.
Yeah, very quickly. I have in mind kind of McDowell's reading in Mind and World. To talk of the contents of experience is already to inhabit the space of implication. So this is perhaps one reading of Sellers in McDowell that I have in mind, such that the appeal to perceptual contents already presupposes a conceptual framework of some sort.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think this is a tricky thing, and I'm not sure how I'm going to answer that, or whether I'm going to think that those accounts are unreconcilable or not. I think perhaps there's a way in which neuroscience might offer a way for those accounts to be both said without their being opposed. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's a good question. I'll have to think on it. Thank you. And about the general intellect, I also need to think about this. I mean, I think the general intellect is also a very tricky question. But I guess, I mean, the way that AI harnesses the knowledge that is embedded in machines, right, which is the kind of idea of the general intellect. I think that's that perhaps, can we just scroll down? I think that does go beyond the exploitation of the workers in some ways, right? Because it's also kind of, it's not just mere exploitation of already existing worker cognition, but kind of tapping into the generative capacities of that existing knowledge, right? So it's able to produce new knowledge using the what it's extracted from. Is that something like what you're thinking?